we may have mentioned or you may have heard elsewhere in the last few days, Robert Mueller has filed his report. Been a little bit of conversation about that. Now, as of this, as we speak now, and as we record this show, we don't know when, how, or if the entire Mueller report will become public. But our next guest has put something together that comes close, I think. Ryan Grim, you know him. He is an author. He is the Washington bureau chief of The Intercept. He's a political commentator for the Young Turks, my old home away from home. And he has also put a book together with Strong Arm Press, the Mueller papers. He's written the introduction and compiled it. And this is based on all the public documents that and indictments and so on that that the Mueller team has put together during its 20 months of operations. So that is, in effect, the public record we have right now. So he's also, by the way, got a book coming out called We've Got People, The Rise of a New Force in American Politics. And he joins us now. Ryan, thanks for coming back on the program.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Well, it's good to have you. And did you know when you put together this Mueller's papers book for Strong Arm Press that the timing of the release was going to be so fortunate? I assume you did not.
Yes and no. I mean, it was becoming clear that the Mueller investigation was wrapping up, and there were also a lot of indications that there was going to be some serious tussling over whether and how much of this was going to be made public. And our initial plan the entire time had been to get ready and publish the Mueller report itself, much like the Iran-Contra report was published, the 9/11 report was published, the Starr report about the Lewinsky scandal was published in book form. But then we realized that, oh, wait, it may be months and it may never happen that the actual Mueller report becomes public. But then I started thinking, well, he has been publishing it chapter by chapter in courtrooms across the country through his sentencing memos, through his indictments. And when I saw in the New Yorker Jeffrey Toobin describe the filings as having an almost novelistic quality, talking about the zany cast of characters that were in this, I was like, I've got to put all this together, because it's also a public document. The Mueller report itself will eventually, hopefully, be its own public document, but these indictments and filings are of public interest too, and it's useful to have them all together. It's awfully annoying to try to Google around and try to find. You say, oh, I heard that Papadopoulos indictment was actually an interesting read, but then you search around and try to find it, and you find the PDF, and then if you leave that device, the PDF is gone. It's the worst possible reading experience you could have. So we just put it all into one book that you can carry around.
Well, it's certainly a useful and smart idea. I guess if I had to say, it's a valuable reference tool. You have a good introduction there to put it into context. Now, of course, with the Mueller report's conclusion about Russia, God bless you, whoever that is, with the Mueller report's conclusions about Russia, I'm kind of wrestling with how to put this, but I mean, there's a certain amount of controversy around it now, and there's a lot of debate and I told you so going on and all of that, and some of that is, I think that frankly is healthy, but where does the recent, as of this writing, we haven't seen the report, we've seen Attorney General Barr's summary, where does all of that, and specifically the conclusion about no collusion with Russia, where, if anywhere, how does that move the positioning of this book or the utility of this book to readers?
The indictments themselves were pointing very strongly in this direction to begin with. So somebody who sat down and read through all of this would probably have not been surprised by the news that there were no further indictments coming from Mueller, and that he had not established that there was collusion. And particularly, at least to me, that became clear in the Roger Stone indictment. Think about it. So you have to think this through on a couple different levels. But on the one level, you have to ask yourself, okay, yes, it's clear that Russia wanted to interfere and did attempt to interfere with the 2016 election. But then you have to ask yourself, what is the advantage if you're Russia of colluding with Trump to do that, of telling the Trump campaign that you're going to do that? You don't need information from them. They're morons. You can't get anything from Jared Kushner or Donald Trump Jr. that you couldn't get by Googling. If it's about leverage, you already have leverage. You have whatever you've gotten on Trump over the last several decades, and you have the Moscow Tower, a multi-$100 million project that he's trying to build in Moscow. So if you're going to intervene, like, why would you even need to be in direct contact with a bunch of incompetent people who are more likely to undermine your project the more that they're involved than they are to help you see it through? But separately, once you get to the Roger Stone indictment, if you need Roger Stone to be your guy to get to Julian Assange, then that's a pretty strong indication that you don't have any better links between you and the people who are behind this leak. Roger Stone is the least reliable character that you can think of for any project you'd want to carry on, particularly something of this sensitivity. He's a guy that pretends to have influence that he doesn't have, that pretends to have connections that he doesn't, that pretends to have engaged in shenanigans when he didn't. And so if the Trump campaign is saying, let's talk to Roger, I hear Roger might know from WikiLeaks what's going on, and that's what's in Stone's indictment. Why did they have to ask Roger Stone? Why didn't they have the information already themselves? And it appears from what Mueller has now told the Department of Justice, that's because they did not have a direct line into the hackers or into WikiLeaks. And so whenever Roger Stone is your key witness or your key operator in anything, you're in a lot of trouble.
I would say so. Plus he seems like a unstable, untrustworthy conduit, as would Trump.
Even relative to the rest of those people.
Right, which is saying a lot. This gets, there are multiple ways this conversation can go, and maybe we'll get to go down a couple of these different pathways, Ryan Grimm, but one of them is if, in fact, it was getting to be increasingly clear from a reading of these public documents that there was no collusion per se, then the question becomes, one of the questions becomes, why would Russia do whatever it is they did? And to me, that was, the whole John le Carré kind of, well, they have this agent, and people started throwing around the buzzwords, and they control him using compromat, and they have their agent in place now, the Manchurian Candidate in the White House. It always seemed to me to be preposterous. My theory was always, whatever the Russians did, specifically in terms of election and interference, would probably fall under the category of trolling Hillary Clinton. That they hate her. They hate her for a variety of reasons, historically having to do with what she did as Secretary of State and so on. And my personal theory, but I want your reaction to it, is they did not think they could change the outcome of the election, but they did think they could annoy Hillary and minimize by a slight bit her margin of victory. And from there was spun a wild and fanciful tale of secret agents in the Oval Office. But what do you think?
Right. They hated her from her own attempts to influence Russian elections, which is ironic. But I think you're right. They wanted to troll Hillary Clinton. They wanted to undermine her. They wanted her to be the weakest possible president that she could be, and they wanted the Democratic Party divided as she came into power. It's the same playbook that they run in a lot of other countries. Like it's nothing new to have Russia monkeying around with adversaries politics, fueling right-wing parties, messing with elections, all of it in the pursuit of what they see as a zero-sum game. That's Russia believes that if anybody else suffers, then they're benefiting as a result of it. And so that's essentially what they're doing here. But I blame in some ways the series. Was it Showtime? Was it FX? The Americans, which you and I have both been covering corruption in Washington for a very long time. And one thing that we have learned from that is that a lot of people don't care. The stories that you write about money in politics and influence in Washington just don't get the level of traffic and readership that even an average political story does, let alone some type of a caper like a P-tape that has compromised the president and turned him into a Russian agent. So, if you're a cable news producer and you have the choice of talking about international money laundering and global real estate, or some storyline worthy of the Americans, then you're gonna go with the one that's gonna get ratings, and it worked, and it took MSNBC from the back of the cable pack to the top of it, but possibly briefly. Her Rachel Maddow's ratings, for instance, on Monday dropped by 500,000 people. Wow. That may not be permanent. That might just be people who couldn't look. They couldn't bear, and they'll be back next week, for her analysis and for the news, and they just need a break. They can't they can't watch her say what the news is now. But I think a lot of them are not coming back, and that the ratings that they were not enjoying in 2014, 15, 16 might go back to being the norm for them.
Well, that leads to another area I definitely wanted to talk with you about. And again, we're talking with Ryan Grimm of The Intercept and editor of the Mueller papers, now out from Strong Arm Press. It gets to another thing I really wanted to talk to you about, and I've been thinking and talking about a lot lately, which is the role, and so have a lot of people, the role and the responsibility of the media, of our brothers and sisters in the media in this whole process. MSNBC being at the center of it, but by no means the only ones. I would argue, and have argued, that to a certain extent, at its worst, the unfounded speculation around these Russia conspiracy theories and an active Putin asset in the, another term they like to throw around, asset in the White House and all that stuff, is it's fake news for Democrats. I mean, to me, that's my conclusion. Maybe it's too harsh for you or others, but it seems to me that it serves exactly the same purpose that the fake news from Fox News or Breitbart or anybody else did, which is it took an unsettling and uncomfortable world that people are forced to live in and gave it a narrative that was soothing, with good guys and bad guys, and we're the good guys. But it is beneath the media's calling to do that. So I have a pretty harsh level of judgment on some of our colleagues, even some that I otherwise respect and like. But I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot. What's your thinking about all that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that, and it all goes back to the publication of the Steele dossier. And so, the Steele dossier was a collection, basically, of unverified leads that a lot of news outlets, were chasing and trying to confirm. And then if they were able, as they were able to confirm bits of it, they would publish that. And, but that was cut short when BuzzFeed published the entire dossier. Now, I think that there is actually a legitimate defense to be made for publishing it, in the sense that it was a document that was being discussed at the highest levels. But what ended up happening was that the dossier became the hypothesis by which everything was judged. And so as new data points emerged, the Rachel Maddows of the world will try to fit them into the dossier, even though the dossier was completely unverified, and if we're to believe the Mueller report, was mostly untrue, because the dossier, if you recall, hypothesized an elaborate scheme of collusion between the campaign and between Russia, with Russia's being an elaborate scheme to turn Trump into an asset or an agent. And so when, for example, there would be news that Manafort had shared polling data with one of his Ukrainian business partners, now you put Manafort and you put the Ukrainian business partner up on the board. You draw strings between them. Then you draw strings from the Ukrainian to people who were close to Putin. You point arrows in all different directions, and all of a sudden you're telling viewers that, look, here's another piece of evidence that supports this Steele dossier, when there might be a much simpler explanation, which is that Manafort, as a lobbyist, a foreign lobbyist, his currency is information. And so, he doesn't seem to pay in actual currency. He's been accused of stealing tens of millions of dollars from his partners. And so, if you're heavily in debt to somebody and you get some private information that might be, if not financially valuable, at least has some ego quality to it. Oh, look, I'm sitting here reading internal polling from the Trump administration. Look how cool I am. And maybe it helps them ingratiate themselves with other Ukrainian elites, whatever. Like that is the currency of lobbying. That's what people pay for. And so he shares this polling information for that reason and that reason only. And because you're using the Steele dossier as your hypothesis that you're proving out, you wind up coming up with these convoluted reasons why he would be sharing polling information when a much simpler explanation is at hand.
See, what you're getting to, Ryan Grim, and I think it's so important in all of this, is the difference between, what, let's say, my average Democratic friends might do with a certain piece of information, and I'm not criticizing them for it. They're not journalists. But the kind of journalists, what you're describing is kind of the journalistic mind at work, and you're a great journalist, so you know. But to me, it consists of, there's several elements to it. One is just good analytical skills that you develop, or that draw you to the job, or you develop on the job, or both. Another is an understanding of how precise language can be, and the third is just what smells right or doesn't. And sometimes it doesn't smell right, and it turns out that your sense of smell is off. But more often than that, if that doesn't really make a lot of sense in your gut, there's probably something to that feeling. But I'm thinking, for example, when I think about analysis and precise communications, I've just been shocked at how many, again, journalists that have been friends, allies for years, maybe not intimate friends or allies, but people I know and, kind of, have hung out with and so on, would, for example, write something like, it is a proven fact that, Paul Manafort gave this information to a known Russian operative. And then I look and I think, well, known Russian operative, well, maybe it's that guy, Konstantin K, I can't remember his last name, who is known to be Russian, but is he an operative? There are unconfirmed stories that he's an operative. So it's not precise, it's not accurate to call him a known Russian operative unless all three words have been proven to connect together. And that sounds like nitpicking to someone who wants to have fun thinking about espionage possibilities. But if you're a journalist, that's kind of the gig, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think part of it is that the Trump campaign, being so criminal and so corrupt, opened up possibilities of the imagination that another type of campaign wouldn't have. Like, if there was a charge of attempted collusion or willingness to collude, I think you could round all of them up. Look at Donald Trump Jr. when he got an email
Right.
that basically said the Kremlin would love to help your dad get elected, and Donald Trump Jr. says, "Great,
Right.
late summer drop for this. That would be wonderful." Like clearly, this is not a guy who is above this sort of activity.
Yeah, and can I just jump in for a second there, Ryan, because I think that's the perfect example. Because I had all sorts of people say to me when that letter or whatever was email exchange came out with Donald Trump Jr., it was like a comic opera version of like setting up a guy who is so willing to break the law. That's Donald Trump Jr., right? He's like, oh, a foreign government wants to collude with me to help my dad and interfere with the election outcome. Yeah, great. I'm all for it. Let's do this. But people would say about that letter, it proves that the Russian government was interfering in our election, including with the Trump campaign. No, it proves that this idiot offspring of our idiot president was totally willing to do it when somebody suggested it. But actually, again, the other piece of connecting evidence is not there. It's just somebody said the Russian government wants to do it. That's not a chain. That's not an evidentiary chain. So. You agree with that?
Mostly, because you have to look at the identity of the people who are saying it. And this wasn't another idiot offspring of a kind of a Russian
right.
inner circle person. And so you can certainly see like why people would put so much stock in that particular exchange. It's Donald Trump Jr. completely admitting that he would love to have Russia's help interfering in the election when told that was Russia's plan. And we don't know exactly where that other buffoon got this information, and that might be contained in the Mueller report. And the Mueller report says that they did not establish. Barr's summary says the Mueller report did not establish that there was collusion. Right. Clearly. Mueller is okay with that interpretation because he has not done anything to try to correct the record. But there's a lot of wiggle room in does not establish. Right. He might have found significant evidence of, but did not firmly establish. And so I do think it's important to see the report, to see what's in there. But you're right, that was viewed as a smoking gun. I can understand why people thought it was, but if you take a step back, you say, and also the lying, Trump right. lied about it. Kushner lied about it. Everybody lied about it and said it was just a meeting about adoption. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, that this collection of liars and corrupt criminals makes you keep asking the question, like, why, if there's nothing there, what are they lying about constantly? And clearly in this case, they were lying because they were embarrassed because they've been caught being offered assistance by somebody claiming to have ties to the Kremlin, and being willing to accept it. And so they lied. They lied to cover that up. But it doesn't. It's not clear. And Mueller says Mueller apparently did not establish that those Russians in that meeting actually had anything.
Right. No, I think we're coming from exactly the same place, which is, follow the evidence and don't go ahead of the evidence. And to me, yeah, that cuts both ways. So, for example, I caught what you caught in the Barr statement, which is, saying that you've not proven collusion is not proof that there was no collusion. That's a logical step mm-hmm. that the Barr report did not take. So we have to be absolutely scrupulous in our adherence to the truth. So and accurate interpretation, and that I come out on the same place too. Now it gets to, because you've put together the Mueller papers. It gets to the question, too, this fascinating thing that I think happened where, the adoration of Mueller, the liberal adoration of Mueller. I was always, and by the way, of other national security figures, James Clapper, who I would say was a well-documented perjurer already, so his credibility never meant much to me. But Clapper, Comey, and then Mueller, who the votive
And
candles for
Brennan,
Brennan, absolutely Brennan. So to me, these are, first of all, I guess my journalistic kink is an instinctive distrust of authority figures, especially, that kind of authority figure. But secondly, when there is record of misleading the public, whether it's Mueller telling the public as FBI director, I believe it was Mueller, that there could be as many as 5,000 sleeper cells in the United States, terror sleeper cells, or whatever it is, that,
right.
my inclination is you just, no matter who's in power, left or right, Democratic or Republican, you do not take authority figures at their word, you dig deeper. And I thought the Clapper report on Russian interference, frankly, from an analytical point of view, was an insult to the reader's intelligence and some of the inferences it drew. So I was a little concerned for a while that the outcome of all of this was going to be increased deference to authority figures on the part of Democrats and liberals, including Mueller. And now you've gone through a very detailed sort of collation of his work, and I'm sure there's a lot, I know there's a lot of value and a lot that's thorough in there, but I'm still of the opinion that, his word is not gospel.
Sure. And particularly that earlier report that you talked about, that the 17 intelligence agencies signed off on. I don't think there even are 17, but let's pretend that they all there are, and they all signed off on this. If you remember, a lot of that was based on RT. They would say RT, is an asset of the Russian government, that's a fine connection to draw, and RT was clearly anti-Clinton and clearly pro-Trump, and that's also a fine conclusion to draw. But that was the bulk of the evidence that they used in that splashy intelligence report. Like, really, this is what we're paying 17 intelligence agencies to do, to watch RT YouTube. I mean, come on. Like, we all knew this. Now, Mueller does, and this is in our book. He did indict a dozen plus Russians for the basically the troll farming that they were doing, and that's something I wrote about before I was at The Intercept, back at the Huffington Post in March of 2017. That was a very real thing, and it's a thing they do in lots of countries, and it's something the left needs to grapple with, to figure out how are you going to deal with these fake accounts, pretending to be real people, pretending to be Jill Stein supporters, or pretending to be Dem exit people, or pretending to be pro-Hillary people who are slagging Bernie people, or vice versa. Because we've all been on listservs, whether it's a neighborhood one or a political one or something else, where one or two bad actors can just annihilate the entire thing. And so, we shouldn't discount the influence that these bots can have on people's attitudes towards particular candidates. And Mueller did suss that out, and he indicted a bunch of these people who, of course, are never going to see an American courtroom. But the indictment is interesting because it does kind of expose the inner workings of this agency.
Well, I read that indictment, and one of the things that struck me about it was, those guys will obviously never stand trial. They're not coming here to,
Right.
And it was really interesting reading. But in terms of the evidence, I didn't, and I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I would have loved to know how they reached those conclusions, and I didn't really see that in there.
Right, and so that goes to the kind of national security nature of the investigation. I think they relied on a lot of NSA firepower in this investigation, which, because they're not planning to actually take these people to court, they're not revealing. If you look at the NSA report that Reality Winner blew the whistle on, it doesn't include a lot of the evidence for how they came to their conclusions, but it does have very, very precise conclusions,
Right.
Which the NSA does have the capability, to get to. And so I do think that, we should take everything with a grain of salt, but I do think that there's reason to believe that he would have the capacity to get the evidence for charges like that.
So I guess my last question for you, and all that makes sense to me, by the way, and I don't disagree. But my last question for you, Ryan Grimm, is this: I've got this feeling that it's bothered me from the beginning that one of the national security responses to the election of a right-wing president and a right-wing government in both houses at the time of Congress was, let's target the left as the cause of all the trouble. It just struck me as awfully convenient. Let's target anyone who's criticizing drone strikes or our desire to escalate tensions with Russia or what we're doing militarily in the Middle East. Those are the people that are the problem, when really we're talking about a massive right-wing online and offline. Yes, sure, they're tinkering with the left and Demexit and all that stuff, but it struck me, and much less so now. I feel better, frankly, after what we know about the Mueller report. But I was concerned about the possibility of a political agenda behind all this. Was there being paranoid?
Not necessarily. But if you go back to what you were saying originally and think about what Putin and Russia's aim was in the election, it was to weaken Hillary Clinton, to bother her, to have her come into office a hobbled, weak president whose left flank was skeptical at best, which they believed then would make it less likely for her to carry out some type of muscular, robust foreign policy the way that she would have preferred to if she had as much political capital as she could muster abroad. And so if that's your goal, then the place you're going to monkey around in is the left. You're going to support the NRA. You're going to support, the far right and any kind of fascist movement operations that you can kind of buttress in ways that you can. But if you're trying to weaken Hillary, the way to do that is to weaken Hillary and to kind of sow discord on the left. So I think that you're probably right that there was some glee in being able to flag that. But at the same time, I think that they were pointing to something that was real.
Okay, fair enough. And I think if I were a Democratic Party strategist, I'd say the best way to protect ourselves from that is with a strong populist left agenda in the next election, so they can't divide us.
Right. They used the Goldman Sachs speeches.
Sure.
They used real things. You can't exploit a fake divide. You can't drive a wedge into a rock solid surface. You need some type of real cleavage to be able to work with. And so if the party becomes stronger and more populist, then they take that away.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I think that some Democrats learned the wrong lesson from it and now are, I suspect, deploying troll armies of their own.
Yeah,
That's not the way to go. But at any rate, Ryan Grimm, thanks so much for this. This is great. The book is The Mueller Papers. It is available now through fine booksellers and also on Amazon. From Strong Arm Press, Ryan is a Washington bureau chief for The Intercept. He has a new book coming out called We've Got People. Ryan, thanks for coming on the program.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You